The insects were droning against the window. The air vents were rattling like something small kept bumping inside, and the phone on the table vibrated once, though its battery had been dead for days. The hotel room had been cleared weeks earlier, but someone had boxed the leftover items for evidence review. Inside the fourth box, beneath receipts and a torn bus schedule, lay the phone that didn't match any guest report. It was scratched, bent on one corner and sealed in a transparent evidence sleeve with a date that shouldn't make sense. July 22nd. Her diary ended on July 19th. The last entry was clipped, unfinished, a sentence stopping mid-word as if she'd turned her head at something behind her. The officer who opened the file expected routine catalog work. Instead, as the screen flickered on, it displayed a row of thumbnail videos all logged July 21st between 02:14 and 03:03 a.m. The corridors filmed in those clips belonged unmistakably to the same hotel, same carpet pattern, same emergency lights humming in soft blue, and in 3 different frames, she appeared walking ahead of the camera, always a few paces out of focus, always turning left at the end of the corridor as if she knew the route. There was no audio track except the faint internal whine of the phone's microphone straining to capture low light. The diary found in her suitcase had no mention of late-night movements or hidden meetings. It was meticulous, almost obsessive. Times, weather notes, appointments, food, even page numbers from the book she was reading. The page for July 20th was blank. The page for July 21st had been ripped out entirely. Whoever tore it did it carefully. No jagged edges, no fibers left behind. Like they didn't want the absence to be noticed, only the silence. When investigators mapped the timestamps, they realized the videos followed a path impossible for the night staff to verify. 2 security cameras that should have captured her movement were offline during those minutes. One had a corrupted memory card. The other recorded only a solid gray screen. The building's engineer called it a voltage dip. The receptionist said the lights had flickered around that hour, but she didn't report it. Flickers were common during summer storms. Except there had been no storm. Only hot, dry air pressing against the windows, trapping the heat inside the walls. The last file on the phone was different. Not video, audio. 12 seconds. A shuffling sound. A soft click like a doorframe shifting under weight, and a distant elevator chime echoing from somewhere deeper in the building. Then a breath that might have belonged to her or to the person holding the phone. The waveform showed a spike at the end, something sharp brushing against the mic, or a fingertip jolting as the recording stopped. No one could explain how a phone with a dead battery produced fresh timestamps. No one could explain how she walked past 2 cameras without appearing in either feed. And no one could explain why the room she was last documented entering had a secondary lock engaged from the inside, a lock that required a key she never checked out. Her suitcase remained untouched in storage, zipper still half opened, as if she froze mid-motion while deciding what to pack. The diary lay on top, neat, waiting, the torn page leaving a faint rectangular shadow on the paper beneath it. She ended her own story on July 19th, but something, or someone, kept recording her long after that. The ceiling panels trembled each time the ventilation kicked in. The carpet muffled every footstep. And down the narrow service corridor, a single exit sign buzzed like it was burning itself out. They began the walkthrough at 06:40 a.m., early enough that the hotel floors were quiet, late enough that the night staff had gone home without crossing paths. The investigator held the phone in his gloved hand, screen dimmed to preserve the fragile charge. The first video clip loaded with a hesitation, pixel grid rippling before stabilizing into the grainy hallway she'd walked through. The corridor was shorter in person than it appeared on the screen. The carpeting had been replaced since the recording date, but the old adhesive outline still marked where the pattern once aligned perfectly with the wall trim. She had always turned left at the end of the corridor, but when the investigator reached the same corner, he found no turn, only a narrow alcove leading to a maintenance closet with a latch that hadn't opened in years. The hotel engineer arrived 10 minutes later with a heavy ring of keys. The latch took effort. Metal scraped, dust lifted in a fine breath, and the door finally swung inward. The closet was barely large enough for 2 people to stand inside. Pipes ran along the walls, sweating condensation in the trapped heat. No sign she'd ever stepped inside. On the phone footage, the hallway beyond that left turn continued another 30 feet before bending again. The wallpaper in the recording had a repeating pattern, pale diamonds fading into darkness. But this hotel floor had been remodeled 2 summers earlier, long before the date of the footage. The shape in the video wasn't a renovation. It was a space that shouldn't exist. They rewatched the clip several times, searching for reflections, shadows, distortions that would reveal a trick of perspective or a mirrored surface. Nothing shifted. Her silhouette moved with natural weight, her steps soft but real, the camera bobbing slightly behind her as if carried by someone taller. The investigator paused the video at the frame where she turned her head. Her hair fell across her cheek in a brief blur. Her left hand lifted, then lowered, fingers brushing the wall. Behind her, at the edge of the frame, a faint rectangle suggested a door, unmarked, closed, too dark to identify. The engineer shook his head when shown the image. That section of the hotel had no door, no storage room, no service lift, only the sealed shaft of an older elevator that had been decommissioned decades ago for safety failures. When they opened the maintenance panel to confirm, a stale draft slipped out, carrying the smell of dust mixed with something faintly metallic. The panel's interior wiring looked intact. A single indicator light blinked amber, though the system had no power running to it. The investigator checked the phone again. The timestamp for that clip, it was 02:27 a.m. July 21st. The same hour, the building logs recorded a brief surge in an unused circuit linked to the sealed elevator shaft. He didn't share that detail with the engineer. He simply stepped back from the panel, eyes fixed on the wire clusters that shouldn't have been live. Then the phone vibrated once more, battery at 2%, and another thumbnail appeared at the bottom of the gallery, as if the device had only now decided to reveal it. A still image, not part of the original set. It showed the same hallway, but empty. Lights dim, no silhouette, no movement. Only the unmarked door was open a few inches. The fluorescent lights hummed with a thin, uneven pitch. The temperature dropped near the sealed shaft, enough to raise the skin on their forearms. And somewhere above the ceiling tiles, a slow, deliberate tapping moved from left to right. They printed the still image and carried it to the same corridor, aligning the frame by matching the radiator bracket and the chipped baseboard corner. In the photo, the unmarked door stood ajar exactly 2 inches. In reality, the wall where that door should be was seamless. Fresh paint, no hinges, no outline. The investigator ran his fingers across the plaster, smooth, solid, but subtly cooler than the surrounding surface. When he pressed harder near the center, the plaster flexed almost imperceptibly, like it wasn't anchored to anything behind it. The engineer insisted it was impossible. The studs in that section were mapped and reinforced. But the thermal camera told a different story. A rectangular patch in the wall showed colder than the rest, the exact dimensions of a door. They moved back to the service counter where the night receptionist had left a statement. She remembered seeing a woman in the west hallway shortly after 2 a.m. on the 21st. The detail disturbed her. The woman was walking quickly, but the overhead lights didn't brighten as she passed under each sensor. The hallway remained dim, as if her movement didn't register. They checked the sensor logs. Every light on that floor showed activity at various times except one, the unit directly above the supposed unmarked door. It had recorded no motion for 6 months, yet its test cycle always passed. The investigator returned to the corridor and replayed the next video clip. In it, she was closer to the camera now. Her right hand hovered at her side, rigid. Her gait had changed. Shorter steps, shoulders slightly turned as if listening behind her. The unmarked door in the footage was shut tight. A thin line of light glowed at its base, flickering like something moving inside cast shadows against the threshold. He walked the length of the hallway again, counting pace for pace with the clip. The phone buzzed twice in his palm, battery at 1%. As he reached the cold patch in the plaster, he tried to peel a corner of paint. The surface refused to give. The engineer brought a stud finder, but the reading spiked and fell erratically, unable to settle on anything solid. When they looked down the hallway again, a housekeeping cart blocked the far end. The housekeeper explained she was cleaning rooms vacated weeks earlier, rooms marked in the system as non-service priority. She apologized for the obstruction and pushed the cart forward. Something under the linens clattered, a key ring sliding against metal. The investigator asked to see it. Among the ordinary keys was one older than the rest, brass worn thin, tagged with a number no longer used in the hotel's grid. The housekeeper said she found it on the floor outside room 408 that morning, lying perfectly centered on the threshold. Room 408 hadn't been booked since the previous winter. He examined the tag. The number wasn't for a guest room. It matched the original numbering for the service elevator before the remodel, the same elevator whose shaft was now sealed. As they stood in the corridor, the overhead motion sensor above the cold patch blinked once, an activation the system shouldn't allow, and the temperature dropped another degree. The plaster flexed again, just slightly, as if something on the other side shifted its weight. The cart's wheels clicked irregularly over the tile transition. The ventilation grills whispered like distant voices gathering in the ducts. And from the far end of the hallway, a faint thud echoed once, then stopped, as if someone had set down a heavy object. They moved toward room 408, the brass key wrapped in a cloth to avoid smudging its surface. The door looked untouched. No scratches, no forced marks, no signs of use. The hotel's lock system had been modernized years before. All doors now opened with encoded cards. Yet the brass key slid into the old cylinder hidden beneath the plate with a soft, precise fit. When he turned it, the mechanism inside clicked smoothly, unhurried, like it had been maintained in secret. The room beyond was dim, blinds half drawn, the air stale but not abandoned. A housekeeping checklist lay on the dresser, stamped from 4 months earlier. The bedspread was pulled slightly out of alignment, as though someone had sat on the edge recently. And near the window beneath the radiator, a small black scuff marked the baseboard, matching the toe of the shoe she had worn in the footage. The investigator powered the phone again, screen trembling at 1%. The next clip opened automatically. She was inside a room now, breathing unevenly. The camera tilted downward, catching her shoes, the same scuff on the baseboard, then turning sharply toward the door. A shadow crossed the floor, elongated, shape distorted by the low light. Not hers. Taller, moving past the threshold without sound. He paused the clip and walked the room carefully, comparing angles. The shadow in the video passed from right to left, but in the real room, the only source of light that could cast such a silhouette was the ceiling fixture near the entrance. And that fixture, according to maintenance records, had been disconnected entirely. Near the nightstand, he noticed faint dust displacement, forming a narrow arc on the wood grain, as if something cylindrical had rested there briefly. The missing diary page, torn on July 21st, might have been placed exactly in that spot. He traced the arc with his fingertip and found a tiny indentation on the edge of the table, a pressure mark smaller than a thumbnail, no deeper than a grain of sand. The engineer knelt by the radiator. Temperature sensors showed a mild but steady draft coming from the wall behind it, not from the vent, from the plaster itself. The same anomalous airflow as the cold patch in the hallway. The investigator lifted the radiator grill. A thin gap ran vertically along the wall, no wider than a pencil, but deep enough to vanish into darkness. He slid the brass keys tip into the gap. Metal touched something solid behind it, something that rang faintly like steel under tension. Then the phone buzzed again, a warning that the battery was critical. A final thumbnail appeared. One last video. The timestamp, 03:03 a.m. July 21st. The file size was tiny, as if it contained almost nothing at all. He opened it. The screen showed the same hallway outside room 408. Lights dim. Carpet slightly rippled near the baseboard. For 3 seconds, the image remained still. Then, from the far end, she stepped into view. Slow, measured, as though she were listening for something behind the walls. She approached the camera, closer than in any other footage. Her mouth moved once, sound failing to register. But her eyes weren't aimed at the lens. They were fixed on something just past it, slightly above, as if someone else stood there holding the camera. Someone taller, someone silent. She lifted her hand toward that unseen presence, fingers trembling as though feeling for heat. The image froze mid-motion. The phone died in his palm. Behind the radiator, the thin draft cut off. Clean, sudden, like a seal closing. The floor creaked once beneath the carpet. The air thickened as though the vents had shut themselves. And somewhere inside the walls, a low vibration pulsed like machinery running with no power source. He stayed still, holding the dead phone, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness of room 408. The radiator grill hung half open. The narrow gap behind it was silent now, the faint draft sealed as fully as a closing throat. The engineer whispered that they should step back, but the investigator crouched instead, studying the seam in the plaster. Dust along the baseboard had shifted, only a few grains, but enough to show movement from inside the wall outward, as if something had pressed gently against the interior surface, enough to disturb the debris but not to break through. He touched the seam again. The plaster felt warm now, not from heating pipes. Those ran along the opposite wall. This warmth pulsed with a rhythm too slow to be mechanical, too irregular to be structural. It was more like the afterglow of a recently opened space. He checked the carpet near the door. In the corner where the baseboard's paint was chipped, a single dark fiber clung to the wood. Not carpet, not clothing. Something synthetic, almost glossy. It matched the fragment visible on the edge of the hallway footage. The thin line of material caught on the unmarked door as it opened. The engineer stepped into the hallway to radio for backup. The door to room 408 drifted halfway closed behind him, hinges not squeaking, just shifting weight. The investigator paused, listening. A soft sound came from behind the plaster, 3 gentle taps spaced evenly, like someone testing for thickness. He stood and pressed his palm flat to the wall. The warmth faded instantly, replaced by a coolness like the wall inhaled and held its breath. When he removed his hand, another tap sounded from behind the seam, closer this time. He moved to the nightstand, searching for anything out of place. That faint indentation, grain-sized, seemed deeper now, or perhaps the light just caught it differently. He angled his face to the wood surface. The indentation aligned perfectly with the brass key's tag hole, the same diameter, the same shallow depth, as if the key had been set there by someone who wanted it found only after all the other clues surfaced. The phone, dead, unresponsive, slipped slightly in his hand. He caught it by instinct, but when he lifted it again, the black screen wasn't entirely black. A thin vertical line glowed near the right edge, faint as a dying filament. Then another appeared beside it, forming a narrow, flickering band. The lines matched the exact proportions of the unmarked door. He raised the phone toward the wall behind the radiator. The glowing band brightened. Not a reflection, not a reboot. Some residual charge bleeding into the display, triggered only when aimed at that exact seam. The hallway sensors pinged once outside, an activation with no staff nearby. He lowered the phone. The band dimmed. He raised it again, brighter. Behind the plaster, something shifted, very small, very quiet. Not scraping, not breaking, more like fabric brushing against a confined surface. He stepped back. The air in room 408 pressed warmer, thicker, as if the room itself leaned inward. He reached for the door, intending to prop it open, but paused when he noticed the shadow on the carpet. A tall silhouette stretching toward him from the hallway, perfectly still. He turned his head. The hallway was empty. No movement, no figure. Yet the shadow remained on the carpet, anchored to a point just outside the doorway, a point where no object cast light. He stepped forward deliberately, and the shadow contracted, pulling away from the threshold as if withdrawing into a narrower space. The engineer's voice crackled over the radio from somewhere down the corridor, distorted by static. The investigator couldn't make out the words, only the urgency in the tone. Then the radio cut completely, leaving the air dense and electrical. He looked again at the wall, at the radiator, at the seam. The warm pulse had returned, faint but steady. He lifted the brass key. The moment the metal neared the plaster, something behind the wall tapped twice in rapid succession. Closer than before, no more muffled, almost like recognition. He held his breath. The plaster flexed inward. A narrow vertical line formed, subtle as a crease in paper. Not opening, not breaking, just marking itself. A door where no door existed. He stepped back instinctively, and the glowing band on the dead phone brightened to near white. Then the wall stilled. The warmth faded. The faint crease vanished entirely, leaving only smooth, painted surface again. But the carpet at his feet held a new indentation, a small one, the precise shape of a shoe's front edge, not his, facing the wall, as though someone had been standing there seconds earlier. He reached for the light switch out of reflex. His hand passed through a draft of cool air coming from nowhere, a brief exhale from behind the plaster, the kind a space makes when settling after movement inside. He stepped into the hall, turning toward the direction of the engineer's last transmission. The corridor was silent, dim, empty. The shadow that had stretched inside room 408 was gone, but the motion sensor above the cold patch blinked once more. This time, it stayed on.